Before I begin, if you've ever lived through something you still can't explain, something that made you question what's real and what isn't, please leave a comment, and subscribe to my YouTube. I wasn't looking for anything supernatural that day. I was just tired. The kind of tired that sinks into your bones and makes even simple kindness feel like work. Being a single father wasn't something I had planned for. My wife passed away 3 years ago, and since then it had just been me and my daughter, Leela. She was 6 years old, bright as sunlight, and the only reason I got up some mornings when the house felt too quiet. That afternoon, I had picked Leela up early from school because she had a mild fever. Nothing serious, just enough to make her cling to my hand and rest her head against my arm while I drove. On the way home, I stopped at a small roadside café about 20 minutes outside town. It wasn't fancy, just a narrow building with chipped paint and a flickering neon coffee sign in the window. We had been there once before on a long drive, and Leela liked the cinnamon rolls. Inside, the air smelled like burnt coffee and sugar. There were only 3 other people there: a truck driver near the window, a young woman scrolling on her phone, and an old woman sitting alone at a small table near the counter. She wore a gray coat that looked too heavy for the season, and her white hair was pulled back into a loose braid. She didn't look poor exactly, just worn. Leela tugged on my sleeve, whispering that she wanted the biggest cinnamon roll. I smiled, ordered our drinks and her pastry, and while I waited to pay, I noticed the old woman at the counter arguing softly with the cashier. Her hands trembled as she counted coins from a small change purse. "I'm sorry," said the cashier, sounding uncomfortable. "You're short." It wasn't much, maybe $2. The old woman nodded as if she expected it. She started putting the coins back, slow and careful, like she had all the time in the world. I don't know why I stepped forward. Maybe because I've known what it feels like to be short on something you desperately need. Maybe because Leela was watching me. I reached into my wallet and handed the cashier a $5 bill. "It's fine," I said. "I've got it." The old woman turned to me then. Her eyes were the strangest shade of pale blue I had ever seen, not cloudy with age, sharp, focused, like she had been waiting. "Thank you," she said softly. I nodded and tried to brush it off. "It's just coffee." But she didn't let go of it that easily. As I took my receipt, she stepped closer and touched my wrist. Her hand was cold, not cool, cold, as she had been outside in winter. "When your daughter leaves tonight," she whispered, leaning close enough that I could smell peppermint on her breath, "don't move." I blinked. "I'm sorry?" Her fingers tightened slightly. "After your daughter leaves, don't move, no matter what you hear." For a second, I just stared at her. I half expected her to laugh and say she was joking, but she didn't smile. "That's very specific," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Are you some kind of fortune teller?" She studied my face as if weighing something invisible. Then she let go of my wrist. "Kindness matters," she said. "It draws attention." I felt a flicker of irritation. Leela was watching us from the table, swinging her legs. I didn't like strangers saying strange things around her. "All right," I said, nodding politely. "You have a good day." She didn't respond. She just went back to her table, picked up her coffee, and stared into it as if she were reading something in the steam. I told myself she was probably confused, maybe early dementia. Maybe she said things like that to everyone who paid for her coffee. By the time Leela and I left, I had already started to forget about it. On the drive home, Leela was quiet. She usually sang along to the radio or asked 100 questions about clouds and birds and why traffic lights changed colors. But that day, she just stared out the window. "You okay, Peanut?" I asked. She nodded without looking at me. When we got home, her fever seemed gone. She ran to her room and came back carrying her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hops. She stood in the doorway to the living room and said something that made my chest tighten. "Daddy, can I sleep at Grandma's tonight?" It wasn't unusual for Leela to visit my mother. They were close, but it was unusual for her to ask suddenly, especially after being sick. "Tonight?" I said. "Why?" She shrugged. "I just want to." There was something in her eyes I couldn't quite read. Not fear, exactly, more like urgency. "I don't know, Leela," I said gently. "You weren't feeling good earlier." "I feel better. Please." I hesitated. My mother lived 15 minutes away. She loved having Leela over. It would give me a quiet evening to catch up on work, maybe finally clean the garage. There was no real reason to say no, except for the whisper that surfaced in my mind. "After your daughter leaves, don't move." I almost laughed at myself. You know what? Okay, I'll call Grandma. Leela's relief was immediate, too immediate. While she packed a small overnight bag, I felt something I couldn't name settle into my stomach, a small stone of unease. I told myself I was being ridiculous. An old woman's rambling shouldn't have any power over me. By 7 p.m. that evening, I was pulling into my mother's driveway. Leela hugged me tight before running inside. "I love you, Daddy," she said, pressing her face against my chest. "I love you more," I told her. As I drove home alone, the sky had already turned dark. The house greeted me with silence when I unlocked the door. And for the first time in years, it felt different. Not empty, just aware. The house had always been quiet after Leela went to bed, but this was a different kind of quiet. This silence felt layered, like it was resting on top of something else. I locked the door behind me, slid the deadbolt into place, and stood there for a moment longer than necessary. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the faint ticking of the wall clock in the hallway. Normal sounds, ordinary, safe. I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door and told myself to stop being dramatic. It had been a long day, a strange encounter with an elderly woman, an unexpected overnight at Grandma's. That was all. I made myself a sandwich I didn't really want and sat at the dining table. Leela's booster seat was still pulled up to the side. A crayon lay on the floor beneath it. I bent down to pick it up, and that's when the whisper of a memory slid through my mind again. "After your daughter leaves, don't move." I straightened slowly, the crayon still in my hand. I almost laughed. Don't move? From what? From doing dishes? From watching television? It sounded ridiculous now, standing in my own kitchen with the overhead light buzzing softly above me. Still, the way she had said it, no matter what you hear. I forced myself to shake it off and carried my plate to the sink. The water ran warm over my hands, steady and grounding. I dried them carefully, as if normal routines could wash away unease. By 8:30, I was on the couch with my laptop open, answering emails. The living room lamp cast a soft yellow glow across the carpet. Outside, a car passed, its headlights sliding briefly across the curtains. Ordinary, everything ordinary. And yet, the longer I sat there, the more aware I became of the space behind me. The couch faced the television. Behind it was the open archway leading to the hallway, and beyond that, the bedrooms. I couldn't see down the hall from where I sat. I didn't need to. I knew the layout by heart. I had walked those floors thousands of times. But that night, the darkness beyond the archway felt thick. At 9:15, the first sound came. A faint creak. I froze, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Old houses creak. They settle, they shift, especially when the temperature drops at night. I knew that. I had told Leela that exact thing when she was scared of shadows. Still, I didn't turn around. I waited. Nothing. I exhaled slowly and went back to typing. My shoulders felt tight. I rolled them once, then twice. Another 10 minutes passed. Then I heard it again. Closer. Not a loud crash, not dramatic, just the subtle, unmistakable sound of weight shifting on wood, like someone easing their foot onto the hallway floorboards. My breath caught halfway in. I didn't turn. Don't move. The words felt different now, less like nonsense, more like instruction. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe I had left a window cracked. Maybe pressure changes were making the wood expand. Maybe... Another sound. This time it wasn't a creak. It was a breath. Soft, slow, and not mine. The air behind me felt occupied. My heart began to pound so hard I was certain whatever was in that hallway could hear it. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stand up, to spin around, to confront whatever was there. But I didn't. I stared at the glow of my laptop screen, the email half written in front of me. My hands trembled slightly, resting on my knees. I listened. There it was again. A slow inhale. Then silence. Time stretched. I don't know how long I sat like that. 5 minutes? 10? It felt like hours. My legs began to ache from holding still. A bead of sweat slid down the side of my face, even though the house wasn't warm. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that grief and exhaustion and suggestion had woven together into some kind of waking dream. But the feeling behind me was undeniable. Presence. Not rushing, not attacking. Waiting. Waiting for me to move. A floorboard shifted slightly to my left, closer to the back of the couch now. My throat felt dry. I swallowed carefully, afraid even that small movement might count. No matter what you hear. What if this was the test? What if standing up, turning around, breaking that invisible rule would... What? Let it see me? Let it touch me? I thought of Leela, the way she had hugged me before running into my mother's house, the urgency in her eyes when she had asked to leave. A cold realization began to form. What if she had felt it too? Another breath. This time so close I could almost feel the air stir the back of my neck. Every muscle in my body locked. My vision tunneled slightly, focusing on the blank television screen in front of me. I could see the faint reflection of the room, the couch, the lamp, and behind me, only darkness. But the darkness felt wrong, not empty, dense, like a shadow layered over another shadow. A small, deliberate sound came from the hallway. One step. Not heavy, not rushed, measured, as if something was circling the back of the couch. My mind began to race in ways that didn't feel rational. What if it wasn't here to hurt me? What if it was here because I had been seen, because I had been noticed the moment I chose kindness? Kindness draws attention. The old woman's words echoed like a bell in my skull. Tears cricked at the corners of my eyes, not from sadness, but from sheer pressure. I wanted to move so badly it felt like an itch under my skin. But I stayed still. The breathing stopped, completely. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. It was the kind of silence that waits. And I understood something then. Something that made my blood run cold. Whatever was behind me wasn't confused. It wasn't lost. It knew exactly where I was. And it was waiting for me to break the rule. I don't know how long I sat there staring at my own reflection in the blank television screen, long enough for my legs to go numb, long enough for my heartbeat to stop feeling like panic and start feeling like something slower, heavier, like dread settling into place. The breathing didn't come back. That was almost worse. Because when something makes noise, you can measure it. You can tell yourself it's pipes, wood, imagination. But silence like that, silence with weight, it has intention. My mind kept trying to bargain with logic. Maybe someone had broken in. Maybe there was a real person standing in my hallway. That thought should have pushed me to action, to grab my phone, to run, to shout. But I couldn't shake the certainty that this wasn't a burglar. Burglars don't wait. Burglars don't breathe slow and steady just to let you know they're there. And burglars don't feel like they've been in your house longer than you have. A subtle shift happened behind me. Not a step, not a creak. More like the air itself moved, like something leaned closer without touching me. Every hair on my arm stood straight up. I thought of Leela again. The way she had stood in the living room earlier clutching Mr. Hops, the way she hadn't met my eyes when she asked to leave. Had she seen it? Children notice things adults train themselves to ignore. My wife used to say that, back when life felt simple and explainable. My chest tightened at the memory of her. 3 years ago, the hospital room had felt just as thick as this living room did now. That same sense of something unseen standing just out of sight, waiting. I swallowed hard. "Not tonight," I whispered under my breath before I could stop myself. The words barely left my lips, but the effect was immediate. The television screen flickered just once. A thin ripple across the black surface, like static trying to form. I stopped breathing altogether. The lamp beside me dimmed slightly, then steadied. And then I heard it again, not from the hallway this time, from directly behind the couch. A soft, dragging sound, like fingertips grazing fabric. My spine felt like ice. Whatever it was, it had moved closer. My instinct screamed at me to leap up, to spin around and confront it, to prove to myself that it was nothing, that I was letting an old woman's nonsense crawl into my head. But deep down, beneath the fear, beneath the rational voice trying to claw its way back to control, there was something else. Recognition. As if my body knew the rules, even if my mind didn't. Don't move. My breathing became shallow, careful, measured in small sips of air. The dragging sound stopped. A long, slow inhale followed, right at the back of my head. I felt it then. Not touch, not quite, but proximity so close it pressed against my skin without contact, like standing near an open freezer, feeling the cold radiate out. Tears slipped silently down my cheeks, not from terror alone, but from the overwhelming realization that I was utterly powerless in that moment. My strength, my logic, my stubbornness, none of it mattered. All I could do was stay still. Minutes passed, or seconds. Time didn't feel real anymore. Then something unexpected happened. The air changed. The oppressive heaviness shifted just slightly, not gone, but altered, like another presence had entered the room. Warmer, familiar. A scent drifted faintly toward me. Lavender. My wife used to wear lavender lotion before bed. It was subtle, never overpowering, just enough that when she hugged Leela goodnight, the scent lingered on her pajamas. My throat closed. I hadn't smelled that in years. The cold behind me didn't retreat, but it seemed to hesitate. And for the first time since I'd come home, I felt something else in the room. Not waiting, standing. Between. The temperature around my shoulders warmed slightly, as if someone had stepped close enough to shield me. I didn't dare turn to confirm it, but I felt it. 2 different weights in the air. One patient and hollow, the other steady and protective. A tremor ran through my body as realization settled in. Kindness draws attention. Maybe the old woman hadn't been warning me about punishment. Maybe she'd been warning me about awareness. What if paying back coffee had opened something? What if compassion, even small and ordinary, was like lighting a candle in a dark place? You don't just illuminate good things, you illuminate everything. The cold presence shifted again, restless now. The television screen flickered once more, and in its faint reflection I saw something I will never forget. Behind the couch, rising slightly above the backrest, was a darker shape within the darkness. Not solid, not defined, just an absence of light where there should have been wall. And just in front of it, closer to me, a softer distortion, like heat waves in summer air, subtle, protective. The lavender scent grew stronger for a moment, and then I heard it. Not the cold breathing, not the dragging sound, a whisper, so faint I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Stay. The voice wasn't sharp, it wasn't frightened, it was calm, and it sounded like her. My heart shattered and reformed in the same instant. I stayed. The darker shape seemed to waver, as if testing boundaries. The air grew tense again, pressure building like before a storm. But I didn't move. I didn't blink. I didn't break. And slowly, painfully slowly, the cold began to recede. Not in a rush, not in defeat, but like something deciding it would wait for another opportunity. The lavender faded with it. The lamp brightened fully again. The television screen went still and empty. The house returned to ordinary silence. I sat there long after the air felt normal, afraid that if I tested it, I'd discover it had never truly left. And deep down, I understood something that chilled me more than anything that night. The warning hadn't been about surviving one moment. It had been about understanding that I had been seen. And once something sees you, it doesn't forget. I don't remember deciding to breathe again. At some point, air simply forced its way back into my lungs, shaky and uneven. My body felt like it had run a marathon without moving an inch. My legs tingled from sitting so still. My jaw ached from being clenched. But the house was quiet. Not heavy, not aware, just quiet. I stayed on the couch for several more minutes, staring at the dark television screen as if it might betray me again. Nothing flickered. No distorted shapes, no layered shadows. Finally, carefully, I tested the smallest movement I could manage. I blinked. Nothing happened. I swallowed. Still nothing. Slowly, like someone disarming a trap, I lifted my right hand from my knee. The motion felt loud in my own body, even though it made no sound. I waited. The air didn't shift. The hallway didn't breathe. The temperature remained steady. Very carefully, I turned my head. The archway behind the couch looked ordinary, just a dark hallway leading to Lila's bedroom and mine. The same framed photos on the wall, the same narrow runner rug stretching down the center. Empty. I stood up too fast. My knees buckled slightly and I had to grab the back of the couch to steady myself. The sudden rush of movement made my heart spike again. I half expected something to grab my ankle from behind, to punish me for finally breaking stillness. But nothing touched me. I stepped around the couch and walked toward the hallway. Each footstep felt like it didn't belong to me. The hallway light switch was halfway down the wall. I reached it and flicked it on. The soft yellow glow spilled over everything, revealing nothing out of place. Lila's bedroom door stood slightly open. I pushed it wider and flipped her light on too. Her bed was neatly made. Mr. Hops was gone with her. The air smelled faintly of the strawberry shampoo she used. Normal. I checked my bedroom next. Closet door closed, windows locked. No sign of intrusion, no explanation. I walked back into the living room slowly, scanning corners, shadows, ceilings. The rational part of my brain had returned, trying desperately to regain control. You imagined it, it insisted. Stress, grief, suggestion. But imagination doesn't make lamps dim. Imagination doesn't change the air temperature. And imagination doesn't carry the scent of lavender you haven't owned in 3 years. My hands began to shake as the weight of what had almost happened settled in. Almost. That word stuck with me. Something had been waiting for me to move, not to simply exist, not to breathe, but to react, to break the rule. And if I had... I didn't let my thoughts finish that question. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table and called my mother. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Everything okay?" Her voice sounded sleepy but alert. "Yeah," I said too quickly. "I just wanted to check on Lila." "She's fine," my mom replied. "Already asleep. She insisted on using the nightlight in the hallway, though. Said she didn't want any shadows near her door." My throat tightened. "Did she say why she wanted to come over tonight?" I asked carefully. There was a small pause. "She said the house felt crowded." The word hit me like a physical blow. Crowded. "She's a child," my mother continued gently. "Kids say things." "Yeah," I murmured. "Yeah, they do." After we hung up, I stood in the middle of the living room, phone still in my hand, and looked around at the space differently. Crowded. Had it been building? Had there been signs I ignored? Lila sometimes talked to empty corners when she was younger, but I always chalked it up to imagination. After her mother passed, she went through a phase of saying she could still feel Mommy. I smiled through that, swallowing my own ache. Now I wasn't sure what to think. My gaze drifted to the front window. The curtains were slightly parted, revealing a slice of the dark street outside. For a split second, I thought I saw movement near the sidewalk. I stepped closer. There, under the streetlight across the road, stood a figure. My breath left me in a thin stream. It was her, the old woman from the café. She stood perfectly still, hands folded in front of her gray coat, looking directly at my house, at me. The distance between us was too far for details, but I knew it was her. The posture, the braid, the stillness. A surge of anger rose up, cutting through fear. I grabbed my jacket and unlocked the front door without thinking. Cold night air rushed in as I stepped onto the porch. "Hey!" I called out. The street was empty. The space under the streetlight was bare. No gray coat, no braid, no movement. Just the hum of electricity and the distant bark of a dog. I walked to the edge of the yard, scanning left and right. The sidewalk stretched in both directions, deserted. My chest felt tight again, but this time it wasn't just fear. It was confusion. Had she followed me? Had she known exactly what would happen tonight? Or had she been making sure I survived it? I stepped back onto the porch slowly and looked up at the dark windows of my own house. For the first time, I wondered if kindness really did draw attention. And if so, from what side? Because something had been there tonight. Something patient, something ancient feeling, and something else had stood between us. If I hadn't paid that coffee, would I have been alone in that living room? Or had I been chosen long before that afternoon? As I closed the door and locked it again, one thought settled into my mind with quiet certainty. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. Around midnight, I lay down on top of the covers in my bedroom, fully dressed, the lamp still on. I kept the door open, staring at the strip of hallway visible from my pillow. Every small sound made my body tense. The heater kicking on, the refrigerator humming, the house settling. But the heavy presence didn't return. What returned instead were questions. By 2 a.m, I gave up pretending I could rest. I sat up, rubbed my face, and made a decision that felt both foolish and necessary. At 8 a.m. when the cafe opened, I would be there. If the old woman had known what was going to happen, she either understood something I didn't, or she was part of it. I needed answers. When morning finally came, it felt dull and ordinary, almost mocking. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window like nothing had happened. Birds chirped. A delivery truck rolled down the street. The house looked harmless. I showered quickly, then drove to my mother's house to pick up Lila. She ran into my arms the moment I stepped inside. "Daddy," she said, hugging me tight. I held her a little longer than usual. "Did you sleep okay?" She nodded against my chest. "Grandma let me have pancakes." I smiled faintly. "Lucky you." On the drive home, I kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Lila," I said carefully, "when you said the house felt crowded, what did you mean?" She stared out the window for a moment before answering. "It just feels like someone's always in the hallway," she said simply. "But when I look, nobody's there." My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "How long has it felt like that?" She shrugged. "Since a little after my birthday." Her birthday had been 3 months ago. 3 months of something watching from the hallway. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked confused. "I thought you knew." The innocence in her voice broke something inside me. When we got home, I kept her close while she played in the living room. Nothing felt wrong in the daylight. No heaviness, no strange air shifts. Just a house with toys scattered across the carpet and sunlight warming the floor. But daylight doesn't erase what night reveals. After dropping Lila at school, I drove straight to the roadside café. The neon sign flickered the same way it had the day before. The parking lot was nearly empty. My pulse quickened as I stepped inside. The same cashier stood behind the counter. I scanned the room. No gray coat, no braid, no pale blue eyes. I approached the counter. "The older woman who was here yesterday. Do you know her?" The cashier frowned slightly. "Older woman?" "She was sitting near the counter, gray coat, white braid. I paid for her coffee." The cashier's expression shifted from confusion to something else, something closer to concern. "Sir," she said slowly, "no one like that was here yesterday." I felt irritation flare. Yes, she was. She didn't have enough money. I covered it. The cashier hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. "You were alone at the counter." The room felt smaller suddenly. "What about the tables, the truck driver, the girl on her phone?" She nodded. "They were here, but no older woman." A cold sensation crept up my spine. I asked if they had security cameras. She hesitated again, but eventually turned a small monitor toward me. She rewound the footage to yesterday afternoon. I watched myself enter with Lila. I watched us stand in line. I watched myself reach into my wallet and hand over a $5 bill. But there was no one beside me. No gray coat, no trembling hands counting coins, no one touching my wrist. I stepped back from the counter. "That's not," I began, but the words dissolved. The cashier's voice softened. "Are you okay, sir?" I forced a tight smile. "Yeah, I must have mixed something up." I left before she could ask anything else. Out in the parking lot, the world felt unreal. Cars passed, a breeze moved through the trees. Life continued as if nothing had shifted beneath it. But I knew what I saw. I felt her hand. I heard her whisper, "After your daughter leaves, don't move." If she hadn't been in that cafe, then where had she been? Or maybe the better question was, what had she been? I sat in my car for a long time, replaying the footage in my mind, the empty space beside me, the way I had leaned slightly as if someone had stepped close. Then another thought struck me. If the cameras didn't see her, then maybe she hadn't needed to be seen. Maybe she had been there for me alone. The idea should have terrified me. Instead, it brought an unexpected flicker of gratitude, because without that warning, I wouldn't have stayed still. And if I hadn't stayed still, I don't think I would be here telling this story. But the mystery deepened in a way I couldn't ignore. If she wasn't in that cafe, then how had she known about my daughter leaving? How had she known about that night? And why had she chosen me? As I started the engine and pulled out of the lot, I couldn't shake one final unsettling realization. If the cameras hadn't captured her, then maybe whatever had been in my hallway that night wouldn't have been captured either. And that meant there was no proof, no evidence, just me and something that had been watching my family for months. I drove home in a fog that felt thicker than anything I had experienced the night before. At least fear has edges. It has a shape you can react to. This was uncertainty, and uncertainty seeps into everything. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the house. It looked the same as it always had. 2 stories, pale siding, the small maple tree in the front yard that Lila and I decorated with lights every December. There was nothing ominous about it in daylight. But I knew better now. I went inside and locked the door carefully behind me. The quiet greeted me again, but without the suffocating pressure from the night before. Still, I didn't trust it. Instead of going to the couch, I walked straight to the hallway. I stood there in the center, looking at the floorboards. 3 months. Since Lila's birthday. That would have been around the time I finally packed away my wife's clothes. I had kept them in the closet far longer than I should have, not because I couldn't let go, but because letting go felt like admitting she wasn't coming back. On Lila's birthday, I donated the last of them, even the lavender lotion bottle she used to keep by the sink. That night, Lila had cried in bed and said she felt like Mommy was farther away. At the time, I told her grief works like that. It stretches and bends until it feels distant. Now, standing in the hallway, I wondered something else. Had I closed a door that wasn't meant to be closed? I knelt and pressed my palm flat against the wooden floor. It felt solid, cool, normal. But memory tugged at me, the creak from last night, the step, the slow circling. I stood up and walked into Lila's room. I opened her closet. Nothing unusual, just small dresses, sneakers, bright drawings taped to the inside of the door. Then I walked into my own bedroom and stared at the empty corner where my wife's dresser used to stand. The air felt slightly cooler there. My chest tightened again, not from fear this time, but from longing. "Emily," I whispered before I could stop myself. Silence answered, but not the heavy silence from last night, just ordinary absence. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to think rationally. If this was psychological, then it was triggered by grief, suggestion from the old woman, stress, exhaustion. But that explanation fell apart when I remembered the cafe footage. She wasn't there, and yet she had been, which meant something had crossed into my life intentionally. The question was why. A sudden thought struck me, sharp and unsettling. What if the presence in the hallway wasn't new? What if it had always been there, and Lila had simply been sensitive enough to feel it? And what if my wife had known? I stood abruptly and went to the hall closet. On the top shelf was an old storage box filled with things I hadn't been strong enough to sort through properly. Letters, photos, a few small journals Emily used to keep. I carried the box to the dining table and opened it slowly. The journals weren't dramatic, just daily reflections, grocery lists mixed with thoughts about motherhood and marriage. But one entry caught my attention. It was dated about 6 months before she passed. "I don't want to alarm him," she had written, "but sometimes I feel like the house holds on to things, especially at night. I wake up thinking someone is standing in the hallway. I tell myself it's stress or the wind, but the air feels crowded." My hands went cold. Crowded. The same word Lila had used. I kept reading. "Last night, I smelled lavender even though I hadn't used the lotion. It felt comforting at first, but then it felt like something was trying to imitate comfort." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Imitate comfort. That meant there had been two sensations even then, something protective and something else. A tremor moved through my chest. Had the lavender scent last night truly been her, or had it been something mimicking her to keep me still? My thoughts spiraled in a direction I didn't want to follow. I closed the journal and pressed my palms against my eyes. The old woman's words echoed again. Kindness draws attention. What if kindness wasn't what invited it? What if grief did? Grief is loud in ways we don't realize. It leaves cracks in you, openings, vulnerabilities. Maybe something had noticed the emptiness in our home long before I stepped into that café. Maybe it had been feeding on it, waiting. And maybe the old woman, whatever she was, had intervened at the last possible moment. A sudden chill brushed the back of my neck. I froze instinctively. But this time there was no weight behind it, no breathing, just a brief drop in temperature. Still, I didn't like the timing. "I'm not afraid of you," I said quietly into the room. That wasn't entirely true. I was afraid. But fear can't be the only response to something that thrives on attention. The house remained silent. I looked down at Emily's journal again. If she'd sent something before she passed, then this wasn't about me paying for coffee. This was about something that had attached itself to our family. And last night, for the first time, it had tested boundaries. It had waited for me to move, which meant it needed permission, or reaction, or invitation, and I had denied it. A slow realization formed in my mind, steady and heavy. If staying still had protected me, then movement was what it wanted. Not just physical movement, emotional movement, grief turning into anger, fear turning into panic, loneliness turning into desperation. Those were movements too. I closed the journal gently and stood up. If something had been feeding off the cracks in our lives, then I needed to start closing them, not by ignoring grief, but by facing it without letting it consume me. Because whether this was psychological or something far older, it had waited for weakness, and I was done giving it that. But as I walked back into the hallway, one final thought lingered. If the old woman wasn't real, then something else had stepped into reality long enough to warn me. And that meant there were forces at play I didn't understand. The only question now was whether the warning was a one-time mercy or the beginning of something much bigger. That afternoon, I picked Lila up from school with a new kind of awareness. I watched the way she moved through the world, the way she laughed at something her friend said, the way she skipped toward the car, backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She looked like any other 6-year-old, but I knew now she had been carrying something quietly for months. On the drive home, I kept my voice light. "Hey, Peanut, when you feel like someone's in the hallway, does it scare you?" She thought about it for a moment. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not when Mommy's there." My hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Mommy?" She nodded casually, as if we were discussing the weather. "Yeah, when the shadow comes close, Mommy stands in front of it." A chill ran through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "What shadow?" She shrugged. "The tall one. It bends weird." My throat went dry. "And Mommy stands in front of it?" "Uh-huh," she said. "She tells me to stay in my bed, so I do." A strange mixture of terror and comfort moved through me. "What does Mommy look like when you see her?" Lila's answer was simple. "Like light." I didn't speak for the rest of the drive. That night, I made a decision that felt small but important. I moved a chair into the hallway, placing it halfway between Lila's bedroom and mine. I told her it was just in case she needed me faster at night. In truth, I wanted to face the hallway directly. I didn't sit on the couch that evening. I didn't turn my back to the darkness. Instead, after Lila fell asleep, I turned off most of the lights and sat in my chair, facing the length of the hall. If something wanted me to move, I would decide when. Midnight came and went. The house settled into its usual nighttime rhythm. Pipes clicked, the refrigerator hummed, wind brushed softly against the siding. Around 1:30, the temperature shifted. Subtle, but noticeable. The air grew denser, like humidity without moisture. My heart began to beat faster, but I stayed seated. "I know you're there," I said quietly into the dark. The hallway did not respond with sound. It responded with presence. At the far end, near the living room archway, the shadows thickened. Not dramatically, just enough to feel intentional. I kept my eyes steady. "I'm not inviting you," I continued calmly. "You don't belong here." A faint ripple moved along the wall, like light distorting through water. Then I saw it, the outline Lila had described. Tall, narrow, the top slightly bent at an unnatural angle. It wasn't solid, it was absence, a vertical stretch of darkness darker than the surrounding dark. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I didn't look away. "You've been here long enough," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. The shape shifted slightly forward. The air around me cooled instantly. My body screamed at me to run to Lila's room, to scoop her up and flee the house entirely. But that was movement. Panic was movement, and something in me understood that it wanted that. Instead, I placed both feet firmly on the ground and rested my hands on my knees. "I'm not afraid of you," I said again, though fear coiled tight inside my chest. The shape seemed to stretch taller, pressing against the ceiling as if testing its boundaries. Then something extraordinary happened. From behind me, from Lila's bedroom, a soft glow spilled into the hallway. Not bright, not blinding, just a gentle warmth. The shadow paused. The air shifted again, this time in two directions, cold from the front, warm from behind. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The lavender scent drifted forward once more. The tall shadow wavered. "You can't have us," I said quietly. "We're not empty anymore." The words surprised me, but they felt true. Grief had hollowed our house, that much I couldn't deny. For months I had walked through rooms like a ghost myself, barely present. Lila had felt it. Maybe something else had too. But tonight, I wasn't hollow. I was anchored. The shadow leaned forward one final time, its edges fraying like smoke, and then, slowly, it retreated. Not vanishing, not defeated, just withdrawing down the hallway until it blended into normal darkness. The temperature rose gradually back to ordinary levels. The lavender lingered a few seconds longer. Then it faded. I stayed seated for another hour just to be certain.
Nothing else came. Eventually, I stood and walked into Lila's room. She was asleep, her small hand curled around Mr. Hops. The nightlight cast soft shapes on the wall, peaceful shapes. I knelt beside her bed and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Thank you," I whispered, not entirely sure who I was speaking to. As I stood to leave, I felt something gentle brush my shoulder. Not cold, not heavy, just familiar. And for the first time since Emily passed, I didn't feel alone in the house. But I also understood something else. The shadow hadn't disappeared forever. It had retreated, which meant it was still out there somewhere, waiting for cracks, waiting for grief, waiting for movement. And that meant my job wasn't over. It had just begun.
The nights that followed weren't peaceful, but they weren't chaotic either. They were watchful. For the first time since Emily passed, I stopped avoiding the quiet. Instead of drowning it out with television or late-night scrolling, I sat with it. I talked to Lila more. I let her talk about her mother without changing the subject when my chest got tight. We brought the lavender back into the house, not as a desperate ritual, but as memory. I bought a small bottle of the same lotion and set it beside the sink, not as bait, as acknowledgement. Something had been feeding on the emptiness here, on unspoken grief, on the hollow spaces between us. So I started filling those spaces. We cooked dinner together more often. We left lights on in the hallway at night, not out of fear, but because Lila liked it that way. I moved family photos back into the living room instead of keeping them stored away because they hurt too much to look at. Pain avoided becomes shadow. Pain faced becomes light. About a week after the second encounter, I had a dream. I was standing in the same roadside café where I had first seen the old woman. The neon sign buzzed overhead, but the room was empty. No cashier, no tables, no sound. She sat alone near the window, gray coat folded neatly in her lap. "You came," she said without looking surprised. "I need to know what you are," I told her. She smiled faintly. "Not what, why?" "Why me?" Her pale blue eyes held mine steadily. "Because you listened. I almost didn't, but you did." The dream shifted subtly. The walls of the café seemed thinner, as if beyond them was something vast and dark. "Is it gone?" I asked her. She shook her head slowly. "Nothing like that ever truly goes. It waits." "For what?" "For the moment someone forgets they are not alone." I woke up with my heart pounding, the early morning light filtering through the blinds. It was just a dream, and yet it didn't feel random. That afternoon, I drove past the cafe again. It was closed. A small sign hung crookedly in the window, "For lease." I parked and stepped out of the car, staring at the darkened interior. Dust coated the glass. It looked abandoned for months, not days. A neighboring shop owner stood outside watering plants. I approached him casually. "Hey," I said, "what happened to the cafe?" He frowned slightly. "That place? Been closed almost a year now." My stomach dropped. "Closed?" I repeated. "Yeah, owner passed away. No one took it over." I glanced back at the dark windows. "But I was here last week," I insisted quietly. The man gave me a polite but puzzled look. "Not possible." I nodded slowly and thanked him before walking back to my car. I didn't feel panic this time. I felt clarity. The warning was never tied to a physical place. It had been tied to timing. Whatever the old woman was, she had stepped into my reality long enough to shift it, and then she was gone. That night, after Lila fell asleep, I didn't sit in the hallway. I sat on the couch again.
the same couch where it had circled me, but this time I left the lamp off. I let the darkness exist, because darkness itself isn't the enemy, it's what grows in it. Around midnight, I felt it, not as strong as before, but present. The air near the hallway cooled slightly. The tall shape didn't fully form this time. It lingered at the edge of perfection, like a stain that refused to wash out completely. "You're still here," I said calmly. The temperature dripped another degree, but you can't cross. The house remained silent. I thought about what the old woman had said in my dream. Nothing like that ever truly goes. I understood now that this wasn't a battle I could win once and forget. It was maintenance, like tending a garden. Neglect invites weeds. Care keeps them back. I closed my eyes briefly and focused on something steady. Lila's laughter earlier that evening, the way she insisted on helping stir spaghetti sauce even though she splashed it everywhere, the warmth of her small hand slipping into mine when we crossed the street. Fullness. That was the opposite of what the shadow wanted. When I opened my eyes again, the hallway looked ordinary. The coolness had lifted. It hadn't left completely, but it had weakened, and I realized something profound in that moment. The presence wasn't just waiting for physical movement, it was waiting for surrender, for the kind of grief that turns into isolation, for the kind of exhaustion that makes you stop caring, for the moment you sit in the dark and believe you deserve to be alone in it. But I didn't believe that anymore, not for myself, and not for my daughter. I stood up slowly, not because I was testing anything this time, but because I chose to. I walked down the hallway without hesitation and checked on Lila. She slept peacefully, the soft nightlight casting gentle shapes along her walls. No bending shadow, no distortion, just a child dreaming. As I turned to leave, I paused at her doorway and looked down the hall toward the living room. For a split second, I thought I saw a faint outline near the archway, tall, still, watching. But then it thinned into nothing. Not gone, just denied. And that was enough, because I finally understood the moral of all of this. Kindness doesn't just draw attention from darkness, it also strengthens what stands against it. And the choice between those forces happens in the smallest moments, in whether you move out of fear or stay grounded in love.
It has been almost a year since that night on the couch. A year since I sat frozen while something circled behind me, waiting for me to break. And if you're expecting me to say it never came back, I won't lie to you. It did. But not the way it used to. The first few months after everything happened, I stayed vigilant. Not paranoid, not frantic, just aware. Awareness is different from fear. Fear makes you jump at every shadow. Awareness lets you see which shadows are real. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel a slight drop in temperature in the hallway, a faint heaviness near the archway, a suggestion of something tall standing just out of sight. But it never crosses the boundary. It never circles the couch again. It never breathes at the back of my neck. And I've come to understand why. Because the house is no longer hollow. Grief still lives here. It always will. Emily's absence is stitched into the walls, into the quiet spaces between heartbeats, but it is no longer an open wound. It's a scar, and scars don't invite the same things that wounds do. Lila talks about her mother openly now. We light a lavender candle on her birthday every year and tell stories about her laugh, about the way she used to dance badly in the kitchen just to make us both roll our eyes. The first time we did that, I felt the hallway grow colder, not threatening, just present, like something listening. And I said out loud, "You're not welcome here." Not in anger, in certainty. The air warmed again. I haven't seen the old woman since that day, not in person, not in dreams, but sometimes when I'm driving past that stretch of road where the cafe used to be, I feel a quiet sense of gratitude. I used to question whether she was an angel, a spirit, a projection of my own mind, something older than all of that. Now I don't need a label. Some forces step in only long enough to shift the outcome, and that's enough. There's something else I've never told anyone. About 2 months ago, Lila and I were sitting in the living room coloring. It was late afternoon, sunlight pouring in through the front window. She suddenly paused, crayon hovering midair, and looked toward the hallway. "She says you did good," Lila said casually. My heart skipped. "Who does?" "Mommy." I didn't look toward the hallway. I didn't need to. "What does she mean?" I asked gently. "She says you stayed still when you needed to." A lump rose in my throat so thick I could barely swallow it. Lila went back to coloring like she hadn't rearranged the structure of my entire understanding of reality. I sat there quietly, absorbing it. Stayed still when you needed to. I used to think strength meant action, fixing, confronting, moving forward no matter what. But sometimes strength is restraint. Sometimes survival is refusing to react, refusing to give something the response it feeds on. That night on the couch, I thought I was powerless, but I wasn't. Stillness was power. Love was power. Presence was power. Whatever had been in my hallway didn't want to hurt me in a dramatic, violent way. It wanted permission. It wanted panic. It wanted the emotional door thrown open. And when I didn't give it that, it weakened. Over time, I've come to see the world a little differently, not in a fearful way, in a layered way. I believe there are things we don't fully understand that exist alongside us, some drawn to light, some drawn to emptiness. Kindness may draw attention, but so does despair. The difference is what you choose to nurture afterward. Last week, Lila and I repainted the hallway, soft cream instead of the old pale gray. We hung new pictures, ones filled with color and laughter and trips to the park. The first time I hammered the final nail into the wall, I paused and looked down the length of the hall. It looked brighter, lighter, not because paint changes reality, but because intention does. I haven't smelled lavender unexpectedly in months, and the tall shadow hasn't tested the boundary again. But every once in a while, when the house grows quiet at night, I sit on the couch in the dark on purpose, not to challenge anything, not to prove anything, just to remind myself that the darkness doesn't own the space. I do. We do. And if I ever feel that faint shift in the air again, I know exactly what I'll do. I'll breathe, I'll stay grounded, and I won't move unless I choose to. Because the greatest lesson that old woman gave me wasn't about fear. It was about control. Not control over unseen forces, control over myself, over my reactions, over the cracks I allow to stay open. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt something heavy in your own life, something watching, waiting, feeding on your exhaustion, I want you to remember this. You are stronger in stillness than you think. You don't have to react to every shadow. You don't have to let grief hollow you out. Fill your home with memory. Fill your heart with presence. And whatever stands at the edge of your hallway won't be able to cross. That's my story, and I'm still here, still standing, still choosing when to move.